What up, YouTube? Here with another episode of Talk Boxing. On this episode, I'll be giving y'all my latest thoughts on what's been happening in the sport of boxing. The first fight I'm going to be giving y'all my review on is the fight for the undisputed heavyweight title between Oleksandr Usyk and Tyson Fury. And I'll also be giving y'all my review on the Canelo Alvarez versus Jaime Munguia fight, and as well as the Catterall versus Taylor fight, and as well as my thoughts on the news with what happened with Ryan Garcia after his victorious performance versus Devin Haney a month ago, where he tested positive for banned substances, and what's been going on with that as of late. Anyways, as I had said, first things first, let me give y'all my thoughts on what happened with Tyson Fury and Oleksandr Usyk. And this fight was originally scheduled to happen in February of this year, but because Tyson Fury has suffered a injury that happened during his training camp in preparation for the originally scheduled fight date versus Oleksandr Usyk, hence why it got postponed to a week ago when Tyson Fury and Oleksandr Usyk fought for the undisputed heavyweight title. And Tyson Fury, in his last fight before getting in there with Oleksandr Usyk a week ago to determine who's going to be the one and only undisputed heavyweight champion, he fought Francis Ngannou in Francis Ngannou's debut boxing fight, and that was more like a exhibition money grabbing bout, and he did not look good in his performance versus Francis Ngannou. And Tyson Fury, being a stable household name in heavyweight boxing for as long as he has been, because Tyson Fury was the man in the heavyweight division after the Klitschko era, because Tyson Fury was responsible for dethroning Vladimir Klitschko and defeating Vladimir Klitschko successfully to become unified heavyweight champion. And then he went on to retire due to personal problems, and then he came back and then reconquered the heavyweight division after his trilogy rivalry battle versus Deontay Wilder. And ever since he was able to defeat Deontay Wilder to become unified heavyweight champion, he continued his streak as a successful top heavyweight champion. He defeated the likes of Derek Chisora, Dillian White, Otto Wallin, and names go on and on and on. And Tyson Fury, in his bout versus Francis Ngannou, he wasn't able to close out Francis Ngannou the way people expected him to, because whenever there's a crossover match that happens with a MMA fighter taking on a boxer, whether it's a boxer crossing over to mixed martial arts or a MMA fighter crossing over to professional boxing, usually the boxer, whether he goes over to MMA or the MMA fighter goes over to boxing, the professional fighter in that specific field tends to have a field day with the fighter who transitions over to the other sport. And that wasn't the case when we saw Ngannou step in there with Tyson Fury. And Fury, being considered at that time, if not the best heavyweight, but the second best heavyweight, people were expecting Fury to school Ngannou. That wasn't the case at all, because it was a close bout. It took Anthony Joshua to make an example out of Francis Ngannou to show the difference, not only in experience, but with what the boxers are trained to do in that sport versus a MMA fighter Much like how if Fury or Joshua were to cross over to MMA, I'm quite sure that Ngannou would have made an example out of either both Joshua and Fury. And Oleksandr Usyk in his last bout versus Daniel Dubois, he was successful, but he showed flaws in that fight where he showed weaknesses, where him absorbing body shots tended to be a weak point in his game. And Daniel Dubois landed a controversial shot where he landed a hard shot where Oleksandr Usyk's belt buckle was, and Oleksandr Usyk dropped to the canvas and couldn't answer the 10 count. Luckily for Usyk, the referee had considered that a low blow, and Daniel Dubois and his camp was running with that factor that happened during their bout where Oleksandr Usyk dropped to the canvas after that body shot that was considered an illegal blow, and they were going off of the controversy that it could have been considered a legal blow and it should have been considered a knockout. From my observation, from my perspective, from what I saw, it seemed to be below the belt buckle, just below the belt buckle, and that's why it shouldn't have been ruled a knockdown. And I thought the referee had made the right call. And Oleksandr Usyk was able to finish that bout and successfully defend his unified heavyweight title by stopping Daniel Dubois and getting a TKO victory over on Daniel Dubois, leading him into this fight versus Tyson Fury. Now, I'm mentioning their prior bouts because they didn't look as sharp as they are used to, because they made a reputation out of being technical fighters that fight on a high elite level, and we expect much better out of these two champions heading into their fight. And in their last bouts before meeting each other, they didn't look their best. And Tyson Fury suffering that injury that had delayed this fight from the originally scheduled date was also a factor that fans had to look out for. Is Tyson Fury, because he didn't look as good in his last fight, and that was a fight where he should have cruised to a easy victory, and that fight, his last fight, could have been scored either ways. And Francis Ngannou, he's known for being heavy-handed, was able to drop Tyson Fury in that fight, and that can be a factor where fans can be concerned about how Tyson Fury, is he winding down? Is he hitting that mark in his career where he's winding down and he's no longer in the prime of his career? And granted, this is heavyweight boxing. A big man's blow can drop anybody, and this is combat sports. A effective shot, that one shot can change a fight, and it's anybody's game when it comes to combat sports because of that factor. And both fighters are technically very sound, and if I had the time in my hand, and I've been very busy as of recently, hence why I didn't post videos up to date as I would have liked to. That's why I'm making this combination podcast of a video on this episode of Talk Boxing, where I talk about the most recent fights and the most recent news that's been happening in the sport of boxing. If I have found the time to make individual videos for each topic that I'm going to be talking about on this episode of Talk Boxing, I would have. But here it is as a whole package of an episode of Talk Boxing. I am going to cover all these topics that's going to be related to this episode. And I was expecting Tyson Fury to walk away victorious. If I were to make a previous video, which I would have liked to, I would have told y'all that I was picking Tyson Fury to come out victorious via unanimous decision. And I would have had this fight to be scored to be somewhere around 117 and 111, 116 and 112 in favor of Tyson Fury. Now, on the scorecards, if that were to be the actual results of this fight, then that wouldn't have been much of a close contest. It would have been somewhat one-sided in favor of Tyson Fury, according to my predictions of how I would have guessed this fight to have turned out. And in fact, how this fight turned out, it was much closer than how I had expected it to be. And this fight was very competitive, very back and forth. It was a very active fight. And from a fan's perspective, me watching and observing this fight, it was a very entertaining fight. I enjoyed it. And I personally had this fight score 115 and 112 in favor of Oleksandr Usyk. And Oleksandr Usyk also has scored a knockdown in the 9th round that turned out to help him in this fight, because if it wasn't for that knockdown, it would have been scored 115 and 113, 7 rounds to 5 in favor of Oleksandr Usyk. If it wasn't for that knockdown, Oleksandr Usyk still would have walked away victorious in that fight and became the undisputed heavyweight champion, even if he didn't score that knockdown. And Oleksandr Usyk, I can say confidently that he scored the most devastating knockdown in Tyson Fury's career. And Tyson Fury has been knocked down numerous times in his professional boxing career. This was, I believe, his 8th knockdown that he's faced. He didn't hit the canvas physically. The ropes and the corner was holding Tyson Fury up during the onslaught that started from a successful, very accurate, very thunderous left hand, that overhand left hand Oleksandr Usyk landed on Tyson Fury. Then he had found Tyson Fury to be wounded, and like a hound dog, Usyk got on Fury and wasn't letting up on Fury. And during the lead up to the fight, Usyk did say he wouldn't leave Fury alone. And before the 7th round, it was all Tyson Fury. The first 2 rounds, how the fight went, the first 2 rounds, Usyk started the fight very well, very fluid, and he was more active, and he seemed to get the fight started. And Tyson Fury was more on the reserving end, and Tyson Fury was warming up, and he was collecting data, and he was trying to figure out the rhythm and the game plan of Oleksandr Usyk. And being the intelligent fighter Tyson Fury is, he had figured out Oleksandr Usyk's offense and his game plan by the 3rd round, and he started to use his size advantage to his favor, and his reach and height advantage and his weight advantage, which he usually uses to have leverage over against his opponents, started to come in a factor after the 2nd round. And Tyson Fury was able to telegraph the offense of Oleksandr Usyk. Oleksandr Usyk did do a good job at keeping his head off the center line and keeping his upper body and head movement busy to avoid the interception attempts of Tyson Fury, which Tyson Fury does very well. He does a good job at reading his opponents coming in to close that gap between him and his opponents. And Tyson Fury tends to stick out that jab to keep his opponents at bay at a distance where he'd like to have him at. And Oleksandr Usyk, as I have said, he has made a reputation out of being a very smart, technically sound fighter, and him being a very intelligent fighter as well. He was able to keep his head away and maneuver away from Tyson Fury's jab to find his way to close that distance to where he could be in range to land his attacks. And after the third round, Tyson Fury was able to wear down Oleksandr Usyk by intercepting Usyk, by catching the shorter fighter with uppercuts and swivel hooks and short right hands, by catching Oleksandr Usyk coming in, because Oleksandr Usyk would try and duck and weave his way out from Tyson Fury's jab, and Tyson Fury had noticed that, and he would use that jab as a bait and just have his left arm out there for Oleksandr Usyk to try and avoid, to try and weave his way in to Tyson Fury, and that would set Tyson Fury up to throw that uppercut and throw that right hand and catching Oleksandr Usyk coming in, and that would wear Oleksandr Usyk down all the way till the sixth round. And after the sixth round, that's when Oleksandr Usyk started to step on the gas pedal and show a burst of energy, because he could sense that he was trailing behind on these scorecards, and Tyson Fury was walking away with the lead points. And when Oleksandr Usyk started to turn up the offense, that's when Usyk started to get aggressive and get Tyson Fury to backpedal more, and that's what led Oleksandr Usyk to gain success like he did in the beginning rounds after the mid rounds. And the seventh and eighth round, the seventh round was close and competitive. I still gave the edge to Oleksandr Usyk because he did more than Tyson Fury, because he showed that aggression and his will and guts and fortitude to get back into the fight. And then in the eighth round, that's when Oleksandr Usyk started to find some success, where he would land accurate shots and place his punches very well like he did in the beginning rounds. And Tyson Fury couldn't catch up to the speed of Oleksandr Usyk. The smaller fighter Usyk is the faster fighter, because Tyson Fury doesn't have a reputation of being a fast fighter. And when Tyson Fury tends to get in there with any of his opponents, he is not known for that speed advantage. He is only known for his size advantage, which he uses to his advantage very well. And Oleksandr Usyk's technicality as well as his speed was troubling for Tyson Fury, because if you look at Tyson Fury's past opponents before getting in there with Usyk, they're not on the technical level of Oleksandr Usyk. And that balance of technicality and speed tended to be a killer attribute that neutralized the size of Tyson Fury. And then in the ninth round, Oleksandr Usyk picked up from where he left off at from the eighth round. And after he landed that devastating overhand left hand, which was the key weapon for Oleksandr Usyk in this fight, he was able to get Tyson Fury to retreat, and Tyson Fury couldn't throw any of his punches back, and he was backpedaling. And better yet, he couldn't backpedal and work off his back foot because Tyson Fury was out on his foot. And if the referee didn't intervene and step in, we could have saw a Julio Cesar Chavez versus Meldrick Taylor, where if the referee didn't consider that a knockdown because the ropes in the corner was holding Tyson Fury up and Tyson Fury was knocked out on his feet, if Usyk would have had Fury trapped in that corner and kept on landing at will, then Fury would have eventually went down and possibly not got back up. And we know Tyson Fury is a well-gained fighter that is a very chinny fighter, and he has good nutrition and a resilience that can't be matched. We saw an example of that when Deontay Wilder looked like he had scored a knockout, and like the Undertaker, Tyson Fury rose back up to his feet and finished the fight. And who knows if Fury, because I've never seen Fury that hurt before. We've seen him out on his back when Deontay Wilder knocked him down, and we've seen him take lesser effective knockdowns before, but I don't recall Tyson Fury being that hurt on his feet from that knockdown that Oleksandr Usyk scored on him in this fight. And the bell also saved Fury as well, because who knows if Fury would have got back up on his feet, if he did physically hit the canvas, the bell could have rang and he could have recovered during the midst of the 9th and 10th round, which he did, because even though that knockdown was devastating, Tyson Fury came back to his senses in the 10th round, and Tyson Fury was able to have Oleksandr Usyk kept at a distance where the fight was more slower than the 8th and 9th round during the 10th round, and Fury came back and he was able to maneuver around the ring normally as he does. And Oleksandr Usyk was well reserved in the 10th round because he didn't continue stepping on the gas pedal and continue bringing that pressure to Tyson Fury. And that goes to show the respect that Usyk has for Fury, because Fury, being a fighter that fights on his level that Fury does, and Oleksandr Usyk being a smart fighter, could tell that Fury came back to his senses, and Fury is dangerous when he is on his P's and Q's, and he is knowing to intercept his opponents for trying to come in. And if Oleksandr Usyk would have got ahead of himself and got a little too hyped, then he would have made mistakes. And Fury, being the fighter that he is, he tends to capitalize off of his opponent's mistakes. And Oleksandr Usyk, being well reserved, he could telegraph that Fury recovered from that knockdown and that he wasn't going to get ahead of himself and get over his rhythm for Fury to capitalize off of Usyk's mistakes for trying to come in ahead of himself, where he is more aggressive than he needs to be. And that's what made the 10th round a bounce back round for Tyson Fury, and as well as a round where Oleksandr Usyk reserved his energy and didn't blow unnecessary extra stamina away from his tank. In the 11th and the 12th round, we saw Oleksandr Usyk do his thing, and Fury, his corner didn't urge him, even though Fury had got knocked down in the 9th, that Fury show his eagerness and show desperateness, and that could have been Fury's corner telling him, don't get overzealous, don't get too hyped, and don't waste unnecessary energy that he doesn't need to waste. And if Fury would have stepped on the gas pedal, that could have, from my opinion, helped him neutralize that knockdown that happened in the 9th round. And who knows, if Fury would have brought more aggression to his onslaught, that could have had Fury land more successful shots, and being the bigger fighter would have had Oleksandr Usyk be on the back pedal. And that is how the fight went. That is, to sum up what happened in the fight. The winner that deserved to win had won the fight, and that being Oleksandr Usyk, while one of the judges had this fight score 114 and 113 in favor of Tyson Fury. And I don't see how, because of the knockdown as well, how Usyk could have lost on the scorecards, but it was a close competitive fight to say, nonetheless. And they have a rematch schedule for the end of this year. At December of this year, I believe it's gonna be in Saudi Arabia again, and the Saudis are starting to be the top promotional company in the sport of boxing. They picked up Terence Crawford and Isaac Cruz as well, and they have a good roster, and they work closely with Matchroom and Frank Warren. And before the Saudis made their impact in the sport of boxing, PBC was, I can confidently say, the top dogs of the sport of boxing when it came to the promotional aspect. And then I could have said top rank. But now I can say the Saudis are number one right now, and as well as Matchroom, because they work closely with the Saudis, they can be amongst the mix as well. Then second place I could say is PBC, then the third top rank, and then Matchroom could be ranked fourth. And they are giving out the best, most stacked cards, and they've been doing that with all their featured cards that has been hosted in Saudi Arabia. And they got another stacked bout happening with Terence Crawford's debut fight happening in the summer. I believe in July or August, Terence Crawford is supposed to take on Israeli Madamov for the super welterweight title in LA, I believe, as I said, in August or July. And they got a feature stacked undercard. And from what I heard on boxing sites is that they want to do a Mexico versus USA card as well sometime this year, and as well as have all the fights that the fans are asking for. And this fight with Tyson Fury and Oleksandr Usyk having a rematch clause to it, and them having another fight in Saudi, I can predict that they're going to have a featured undercard that's going to be stacked and of a important factor as well. And because they're having this immediate rematch, and I don't mind that there's a immediate rematch because of how close and competitive this fight was, and I can say that the rematch can be a 50-50 fight as well, and it's going to be fierce and close and competitive like the first fight was. And whoever walks away victorious from their second bout, we saw Anthony Joshua in attendance ringside for this fight. That's most likely who's going to be next in line to challenge for the undisputed heavyweight title. We saw Usyk defeat Joshua twice already, and we saw Usyk defeat Joshua in a non-close competitive bout. Usyk was the clear winner in that fight, and Joshua, he's been showing good adaptation as of late. He's been adding more weapons to his arsenal, and he's improving. He is a true student of the game. And I can say confidently that Tyson Fury and both Oleksandr Usyk would be the favorite to defeat Joshua in that fight. But Joshua, because he's been collecting impressive wins as of late, he is next in line to challenge for the undisputed heavyweight title. And then in 2 weeks or so, we have Zhao Zhang versus Deontay Wilder. And I don't know if that fight is going to be in Saudi Arabia. I don't know, or if it's going to be in America. I believe from what I've heard it's going to be in Saudi Arabia. And that could be a passing of the torch of a fight, because we saw Joseph Parker blow Deontay Wilder out of the water in Deontay Wilder's last fight, and that was December of last year. And we saw Zhao Zhang knock out Joe Joyce twice, and Zhao Zhang, his only defeat came from Hagarov, a Croatian undefeated fighter, and that was a split decision loss, and that was a close fight as well. And then his defeat that he suffered versus Joseph Parker, and Joseph Parker defeated Zhao Zhang in a close competitive bout as well. That was also a decision loss that Zhang suffered versus Parker, and that could have went either ways as well. I thought Parker had won the fight and did enough to defeat Zhang, just as Hagarov did enough to defeat Zhang as well. And that's going to be a heavyweight slugfest that we can see between Zhang and Wilder. And if Zhang has the proper game plan versus Deontay Wilder, who hasn't been looking good as of late, then I can say that Zhang can have a emphatic victory over on Deontay Wilder. And I'm throwing my prediction out there in case that I do not make a preview video leading up to their fight. And if Zhang gets a victory over on Deontay Wilder, who is a decorated heavyweight fighter, a former champion who is reputable, then Zhang can line himself up to challenge for the undisputed heavyweight title sometime in the future as well. And Zhang, being a former interim WBO heavyweight champion who lost that to Joseph Parker, can line himself up if he can defeat Deontay Wilder in a week or two. Then he could have a fight versus Anthony Joshua, who is just as reputable as Deontay Wilder is, and that would be a marquee matchup that the sport of boxing can produce. And Joseph Parker is in the mix as well, and he fought Anthony Joshua in a close bout as well, where Joshua defeated him. And that is the top contenders, along with Philip Hagarov, who's amongst the mix with the top heavyweights as well, that can challenge the winner of the rematch between Tyson Fury and Oleksandr Usyk. Anyways, moving on to the next topic. Now I'm going to be giving y'all my opinion on the Josh Taylor-Jack Catterall fight. This was a rematch from their fight 2 years ago. And Jack Catterall, unlike their first fight, walked away with the W. And this fight, I'm not going to say was of a lesser magnitude. I would say it had more importance to it when it comes to the pure aspect of the sport and the rivalry's sake. This fight wasn't for any of the titles. When they fought the first time, it was for the undisputed super lightweight title, and that's when Josh Taylor was the undisputed super lightweight champion. After he defeated Jose Ramirez to become the undisputed super lightweight champion, he made his comeback home to Scotland to put on a show for his fans. Even though Catterall was undefeated and was well known amongst the domestic scenes out there in England, he still wasn't globally well known, and it was more like a comeback performance of a fight for the undisputed super lightweight champion Josh Taylor after going over to America to become undisputed super lightweight champion. And that fight didn't go the way how most people was expecting the fight to go. Jack Catterall had a tough reputation already, and he put up a tough fight versus Josh Taylor, which he should have walked away the winner of that fight and walked away undisputed super lightweight champion. But unfortunately, that's not how the judges had scored it. From that fight that I saw, when they fought the first time, I thought Catterall did enough to win. It was competitive, it was close, but Josh Taylor walked away with the win, even though Catterall fought the better fight. And after Josh Taylor suffered his first defeat in his pro boxing career in his last fight before this rematch versus Catterall versus Teofimo Lopez, where he had lost the Lineal Ring Magazine and WBO super lightweight title in a dominant performance by Teofimo Lopez, which I would say that was one of Teofimo Lopez's best performances versus Josh Taylor. And Jack Catterall has been collecting wins. His last fight before fighting Josh Taylor for the second time, I believe, was versus Jorge Linares, and Jorge Linares is a well-experienced veteran, and Catterall performed brilliantly versus Linares, and he got a win over on Linares, and Catterall is ranked high amongst all the sanctioning bodies at 140, and the second fight was more fierce, was more active, was more back and forth, was more competitive than the first fight, and it had much more hype than their first initial bout because of what had took place in their first bout. And I personally had this fight scored 115 to 113 in favor of Jack Catterall, and Catterall did get a unanimous decision victory. However, how the official judges had this fight scored was way too wide of a margin because it was much more competitive than how it looked on paper. And Bob Arum, during the post-fight press conference interview, he had interrupted the post-fight press conference interview when the commentary team was interviewing Eddie Hearns and Jack Catterall, talking about what had took place in the fight and as well as what can be next in the future for Catterall. And Arum came into the ring and said that the scorecards was a disgrace. Now, do I disagree with the scorecards? Absolutely. How the judges had this fight scored 117 to 111, 116 to 112, it was much more close than that. If you guys saw how the fight had went, it was competitive. Both fighters fought their asses off, but the right fighter did win the fight. Catterall did enough to get the W in this fight. Now, some of what happened in the fight, but I thought it was rude on Arum's part to come in. I understand him expressing his passion of him going hard for his fighter, and I do agree with him. It was a wrong decision, and it was, now saying it was disgraceful is far of a stretch, but controversial and a wrong decision on the officials' part, how they had this fight scored, the way how they had it scored. But Arum coming in there saying what he said wasn't wrong, but how he did it was unprofessional to say the least. Now, can there be a third fight with Taylor and Catterall? Absolutely. Catterall said he doesn't have a problem it being a trilogy bout between these two rivals, and leading up to the fight, they had shared a lot of personal heat, and they almost came to blows when it came to pre-fight press conferences. And Jack Catterall did say, and Josh Taylor also did say, that they both have mutual respect for each other, regardless of the lead up to the fight. That was for promotional purposes, to put hype around the fight leading up to it. And it's good to see that they have mutual respect and they are on the same level, I can say, as far as scales go, even though I thought Catterall won both fights. But a third fight, because they have one wins apiece, can happen because of them having one up on each other. And I think a third fight can be a good look for the sport of boxing and for both fighters. And how this fight played out and Catterall getting the win from this second bout that they had, a third fight is more beneficial for Taylor than it is for Catterall. Now, Catterall, because he's on a win streak, unlike Taylor, who's lost back-to-back fights, he should strive for a title shot, because I have mentioned before, by all the title organizations, Catterall is ranked amongst the top contenders. And now that Isaac Cruz, who's the current WBA super lightweight champion, is no longer with PBC, and Riot Season, I think that is the promotional company for the Saudis, and they work closely with the Zone, and they have all their fights broadcasted on the Zone. And with Isaac Cruz being promoted by them now, will fight exclusively on the Zone, and he's got a fight coming up in August on the undercard for Madrimov versus Crawford. And if he successfully defends his WBA super lightweight title in August, then Catterall could challenge for the WBA super lightweight title, and that can be a easy in-house fight to make happen because the Saudis work closely with Matchroom, and both Matchroom and the Saudis have their fights broadcasted on the zone. That's why that fight can be a easy fight to make happen. And as well as Devin Haney, he's rumored to fight Sandor Martin, who is a highly ranked contender amongst the top of the super lightweights. And Devin Haney, who's the current WBC super lightweight champion, even though he lost the fight versus Ryan Garcia in his last fight, because Garcia came in overweight, Devin Haney got to hold on to his WBC super lightweight title, and that is a marquee fight in the super lightweight division, and he can challenge either of those champions because Catterall is promoted by Matchroom, and as well as he is a highly ranked contender amongst the top of the super lightweights. And the super lightweight division, I can say, and I've been saying this, is the most lively competitive division in all of boxing right now, and it has many recognizable names in the sport. And as I have said, it would be more beneficial for Catterall to move on from that rivalry with Josh Taylor and go for the bigger prizes. Now, Josh Taylor is a recognizable name amongst not only 140, but amongst the elites of boxing because of his resume, and he is still reputable. And that fight is, as it has shown before from the first two prior fights, is a successful when it comes to the numbers of fans attending that fight, especially out there in England. And with both fighters being based out of England, and that fight being hosted in England can do successful numbers. Doesn't matter how many times that they fight. And to sum up what happened in the fight, Catterall did a good job at baiting Taylor in. When Taylor would attempt to cut off the ring and do his part of launching his attacks, Catterall would aggressively counterattack Josh Taylor whenever Taylor would approach him to press forward, and that would get Josh Taylor to backpedal. And Josh Taylor would find success in the latter mid rounds, and that's when he found a way to neutralize the aggressive counterpunch attack of Jack Catterall. And Josh Taylor, how he would do that was he would work off of volume. He would press forward with more aggression and would come forward with his height and his pressure, and Catterall would have to find other ways to counter Josh Taylor's attack coming forward. And it wasn't until the championship round, the 11th and the 12th round, where Catterall would catch a break from Josh Taylor's onslaught. And how he did that was countering Josh Taylor with a devastating overhand left by maneuvering towards his right and keeping his head off from the center line for Josh Taylor to not find his target. And like how Marquez caught Pacquiao with his overhand right coming in, that's how Catterall would catch Taylor, and that would get Taylor to ease off from pressuring Catterall and coming forward and cutting off the ring versus Catterall. And that would cause a break for Catterall and for Catterall to get back to having Taylor back off of him by fighting at a range that he wants the fight to be fought at and applying the jab to Taylor and peppering him off of him and staying busy with fast jabs and fast punches. It might have been not that meaningful as a devastating counter overhand left hand or from the earlier rounds with his aggressive combination of counter strikes, but that did the job at having Taylor not pursue Catterall in that successful style that was getting him the results that Taylor was looking for in the later mid rounds. And as I said, there was a lot of back and forth, a lot of exchanges between the two fighters during the course of the fight. And as I said, I wouldn't mind seeing a third bout between Catterall and Taylor. But for Taylor, it would be more helpful for him to get a third fight versus Catterall than the other way around, as I had mentioned before. And as I have said, the super lightweight division is the most lucrative division. It has the best matches that can possibly be made in the sport of boxing. If Taylor doesn't get a third fight immediately next versus Catterall, Top Rank still has variety of lucrative opponents for Taylor to get in there with in his next bout. We saw Jaime Ortiz, who put up a good fight versus Teofimo Lopez, which he should have walked away the winner in that fight. If Jaime Ortiz has a fight versus Josh Taylor next, that could be a good fight, a good redemption bout for both fighters, and he can try and fight a guy like Isaac Dogbo, a guy like Jose Pedraza, a guy like Zepeda, names like that. If Josh Taylor were to get in there with guys like that, it can still be a good fight, a lucrative fight as well for Taylor for his next bout. And if Taylor has another fight versus Regis Progress, that would be a good fight for Taylor as well. And Regis Progress is a former champion who competed amongst the top of the super lightweights for a while. He's been a household name, a stable name for a while. It would be a good look for Catterall to get in there with Progress as well. There's Arthur Barboza. There's Ryan Garcia still after he clears up his controversy for his banned substances that he tested positive for. And we know that Golden Boy has their fights broadcasted on the zone as well. That would be a easy fight to make happen for Golden Boy Matchroom in the zone if Catterall was to get in there with the likes of Barboza and Garcia, who are both promoted by Golden Boy. And I can say that Bob Arum, if he wants to do another cross-promotional fight with Golden Boy instead of Matchroom this time, and have a co-promoted bout with both ESPN and the Zone with either Ryan Garcia and Barboza, and Ryan Garcia is a household name that fights at the top of 140, and Ryan Garcia, I can say, he is the most marketable name out there at super lightweight, despite of him not being the champion. He's more marketable than Isaac Cruz is, than Sabriel Matias is, than Devin Haney is, than Teofimo Lopez is as well. And that's why if Catterall or Taylor were to get a fight versus a guy like Ryan Garcia, it would be a step up for fighters like that, promotionally speaking. And And I don't know how likely a third fight between these two fighters may be because of how displeased Bob Arum was, who's the promoter for Josh Taylor. And I don't see how Bob Arum can get Matchroom to agree to have this fight be overseas in America because both fighters are based out of the UK, and it'll make more sense and they'll do more successful numbers if they continue to have this rivalries bouts happen in England instead of America. And Josh Taylor isn't an American fighter, he is a Scottish fighter, and that's a part of the United Kingdom. And that's why it didn't make sense as to why the judges could have been biased towards Jack Catterall if both fighters are based out of the UK. Now, we just gotta wait and see on what the future holds for both Taylor and Catterall. As I have said, with both fighters being amongst the top of the super lightweights, there's still marketable bouts there for both of them. And I'm going to move on to the next topic. And before that, I was also impressed with Catterall's ability to feint and to have Josh Taylor at hesitance when Taylor would seem to approach and close a gap between him and Catterall. And that was an attribute that I forgot to mention that I was impressed with during the fight that I saw for their second bout, as well as their first fight as well. Catterall was able to display that attribute well in the first fight, and that's one of his key weapons in his arsenals. And moving on to the next topic, I'm going to be giving y'all my thoughts on the Canelo Alvarez versus Jaime Munguia fight. Alright, now let's talk about this undisputed super middleweight title bout between Canelo Alvarez and Jaime Munguia. This was a one-sided contest. I personally at this fight scored 116 to 111 in favor of Canelo Alvarez. He successfully defended and retained his undisputed super middleweight titles, and the official scorecards looked very similar to how I had it scored. And to sum up what happened in the fight, the beginning rounds, Canelo Alvarez was methodical and he was looking to collect data and algorithm of what the game plan of Jaime Munguia was going to be, like the well-experienced veteran that Canelo Alvarez is. And the commentators leading up to this fight was talking about the experience factor and that edging Canelo Alvarez, while the size advantage was favoring Jaime Munguia. And Canelo Alvarez didn't let that overwhelm him, because we do know that Canelo Alvarez started in a much lighter weight class. He started to make his way as super lightweight and then worked his way up to super middleweight, becoming undisputed champion there, which he currently is still. And then he moved up to light heavyweight as well, where he had won a title when he knocked out Sergey Kovalev to become WBC light heavyweight champion a few years ago. And Canelo Alvarez, if we're talking GOAT list, he's amongst one of the greatest of all times, not only in Mexican boxing history, but in all of boxing history, with the resume that he holds, and as well as his accomplishments that he's accomplished throughout his professional boxing career. And I've been saying this when I've been covering the most recent Canelo Alvarez fights, is that he has nothing else left to prove. And the only two fights that I say he's had left was this fight that he had a few weeks ago versus Jaime Munguia, who's undefeated, a very young and still up-and-coming fighter with a lot of potential ahead of him still. And David Benavidez as well, also a young up-and-coming fighter who's a former champion, unlike Jaime Munguia. And like Jaime Munguia, although Benavidez already has a title, one in his belt, which he never lost, he also has a lot of potential ahead of him still. And Benavidez, he got a fight coming up next month on the co-feature bout to the Tank Davis versus Frank Martin fight versus a Eastern European fighter by the name of Gazinov. Now, I don't know if I'm pronouncing his name correctly. I'm quite sure and confident that I am not pronouncing his name right. However, bear with me. Benavidez, he was the rumored opponent to get in there on this date versus Canelo Alvarez. However, Canelo Alvarez decided to get in there with Jaime Munguia first instead of David Benavidez. Now, on this side of the spectrum, how it looks to a lot of fans is that Canelo Alvarez looks like he's ducking the smoke from David Benavidez because promotionally speaking, now I'm not saying this is facts, and I mean this with all due respect, the more intriguing bout, at least from my opinion, and this is how I see it, because Benavidez has been getting the more impressive victories when compared to Jaime Munguia, I thought was much more deserving of a shot at the undisputed super middleweight title than Jaime Munguia. I thought Munguia would have to work his way up and get more impressive name under his belt before he could get in there to challenge for the undisputed super middleweight title, which he did a few weeks ago. And you look at what Benavidez did. He ended the undefeated streak of Demetrius Andrade, a former two-division world champion, and he was able to stop Andrade and TKO him, and also defeat Caleb Plant, a former super middleweight champion, in a one-sided dominant performance. And promotionally speaking, because Canelo Alvarez works with PBC instead of Matchroom in the Zone, before he was working with PBC, which he currently is still, I believe his fight deal, he has one more fight left with PBC, and I believe he signed a 3-fight deal with PBC after finishing his 3-fight deal with the Zone and Matchroom. And Jaime Munguia, being a Golden Boy promotion promoted fighter, which Canelo Alvarez worked with prior to him moving on to work on his own promotional company. And there is bad tension and bad blood with Golden Boy Oscar De La Hoya and Canelo Alvarez from what had happened before with Canelo Alvarez and him moving on from working with Golden Boy. That's why it made more sense for Canelo Alvarez to work in-house with PBC, and David Benavidez being a PBC fighter, and that's why it would have made much more sense for that fight to happen instead of Canelo Alvarez reboiling that bad blood with him and De La Hoya and Golden Boy to make this fight happen with Jaime Munguia, a cross-promotional fight instead of an in-house bout with David Benavidez. That's why I can hear the sense-making part that fans have gathered together, that being that Canelo Alvarez doesn't want that fight versus Benavidez, hence why he made the more difficult fight to make happen with Jaime Munguia than Benavidez. But hey, because Canelo Alvarez was able to successfully defend his undisputed super middleweight title, who knows, maybe in the future, coming up in September, which most likely is going to be when Canelo Alvarez fights next, and depending on how Benavidez performs, which he should most likely walk away the winner in, we can see that fight with Saul Alvarez and David Benavidez for Canelo Alvarez's next title defense. And Alvarez did say that he is not ducking Benavidez, and if he could fight Benavidez today, he would. And we just got to wait and see if that fight is going to be made official and when it's going to be announced. It shouldn't be a hard fight to make with both fighters working with PBC. And that's why I'm hoping that that fight will be made next for the undisputed super middleweight title. And there's rumors that the IBF is thinking about having Canelo Alvarez vacate the IBF super middleweight title because he is not fighting the number one ranked mandatory challenger according to the IBF super middleweight rankings. Last time I checked, the number one ranked super middleweight according to the IBF is William Scully, and he's not that reputable, but he is the number one ranked contender according to the IBF super middleweight rankings, and the IBF is wanting Canelo Alvarez to fight Scully next. That is not a marketable fight like how this fight versus Munguia was, and a potential bout versus Benavidez is. And Canelo Alvarez has been the cash cow of the sport for a while now, and it's been that way since the Mayweather-Pacquiao era. And Canelo Alvarez, he can fight whoever, and it'll still draw. He's fought lesser-known British fighters that are not known that well in the Western Hemisphere, and was still able to draw. And that's why if he's to fight Scully, then he can still have a successful of a turnout of the event, but it wouldn't be a good look with the current streak that Canelo Alvarez is on. When he fought Jermell Charlo, who was the unified super welterweight champion, on paper it's not that much of a good look, but Charlo, being a well-reputable name that is well known amongst the sport of boxing, it didn't hurt the reputation of Canelo Alvarez to get in there with the likes of Jermell Charlo, and him getting in there with Jaime Munguia, who was undefeated prior to this defeat that he suffered versus Canelo Alvarez a few weeks ago when they fought, was a step up in competition from that fight that he had prior, his most recent fight that he had prior to fighting Jaime Munguia versus Jermell Charlo, because Jaime Munguia competes at 168 on the frequent, unlike Jermell Charlo, who fights at 154 instead of 168. And Canelo Alvarez, when he fought the likes of John Ryder, fought the likes of Liam Smith and names like that, those guys are more known than a guy like William Scully is. Now, I haven't seen much from William Scully, and Canelo Alvarez, with the rank that he holds, he can dispute IBF because of fighters with the rank that Canelo Alvarez holds have gotten favoritism from sanctioning bodies before, but it looks like IBF is being real strict on Canelo Alvarez and their mandatories, and it would be a bad look for who's next in line to challenge for the undisputed super middleweight title next, because if Canelo Alvarez does have to vacate the IBF super middleweight title, then whoever is next in line to challenge for Canelo Alvarez's belts won't get the chance to be undisputed at super middleweight, and that's not fair to who's next in line to challenge Canelo Alvarez for those titles. And to sum up what happened in the fight, as I had said in the beginning rounds, Jaime Munguia started out fast. Canelo Alvarez was more patient. Then the fourth round was when the fight turned around in the favor of Canelo Alvarez. The first three rounds was close to a score other than the first two rounds. It was the third round. That's when Canelo Alvarez started to loosen up. Then in the fourth round, the exchange between the two got heated, and Canelo Alvarez got the better of the exchange by landing a flush right uppercut when they were exchanging on the inside, and that dropped Jaime Munguia for the first time in his career. And Jaime Munguia responded well. He got back up on his feet. It was more like a flash knockdown than a devastating knockdown, but Canelo Alvarez knew what he was doing, and that goes to show the difference in the experience factor, because Jaime Munguia was worried about that setup left hook that Canelo Alvarez has made a reputation out of, and he launches that left hook by throwing a jab or a left hook to the body to lower the guard of his opponents and land that signature left hook. And Jaime Munguia was on the lookout for that, and he forgot about the right uppercut that Canelo Alvarez was accurately and successfully landing on him throughout the majority of the fight. And the right uppercut was working like a charm for Canelo Alvarez throughout, as I said, the entirety of the fight. Well, at least the majority of the fight, because Jaime Munguia had his successful moments as well. And Canelo Alvarez was able to throw out the jab, and that was keeping Jaime Munguia at bay. And Jaime Munguia was more cautious after that knockdown because he had felt the power of Alvarez, and that's why Munguia wasn't able to step on the gas pedal as much as he would like to when he was successful throughout the opening rounds. That's because Canelo Alvarez wasn't fully loosened up, and Canelo Alvarez was studying the offense of Jaime Munguia, and once Canelo Alvarez collected the data and was able to figure out the game plan of Jaime Munguia and was able to neutralize the aggression and the volume and the speed of Jaime Munguia and the game plan of Jaime Munguia, then it became a chess match. And Jaime Munguia, however, in the 8th and 9th round, as the latter rounds approached, he stepped on the gas pedal and started to bring the pressure, and he was more aggressive with his onslaught of attacks, and the combination works of Jaime Munguia was a little bit overwhelming for Canelo Alvarez to handle, and he was able to get Canelo Alvarez to retreat and backpedal and force Canelo Alvarez to have his back against the ropes in the corner. And Jaime Munguia was able to go to work, and Jaime Munguia was able to mix up his punches going downstairs and upstairs. All his punches might have not landed, but he was doing efficient work. And Canelo Alvarez, what got him the victory in this fight was his punch placement, his accuracy, and his patience, and his punch selection, and his effective work. And him landing the more crisp, efficient shots was able to get Jaime Munguia to retreat and not fight as aggressive as Jaime Munguia would have liked to. And that goes to sum up how the fight had went. And Jaime Munguia, he still has a lot of future ahead of him. He's got a lot of potential. And this one defeat versus who's considered to be the best super middleweight competing at that weight class does not hurt his reputation. This was a learning experience for Jaime Munguia. And whoever he decides to fight next, he's still ranked amongst the high-ranked contenders at super middleweight, and he gained himself more fans and more of a reputation by stepping in there with a reputable fighter like Canelo Alvarez, and that makes him more marketable. And he was already able to draw enough fans for his fights when he was fighting much lesser opponents, and we can confidently say, looking at Jaime Munguia's career, he hasn't fought a lot of marketable, reputable opponents in the past. Now that he's got an in there with the likes of a veteran like Canelo Alvarez, he's going to be able to draw more fans, and hopefully for his next fight, he steps up in competition and fights more of a elite fighter amongst the super middleweight, regardless of him not being under the PBC banner, because PBC has more reputable super middleweights. If he's to fight fighters that fights in the UK as super middleweight, and there's guys like Liam Smith, Callum Smith, there's guys like Chris Eubank, and other fighters that fight on the zone that could have Golden Boy and Matchroom have a fight with Jaime Munguia and whoever is a reputable super middleweight out there overseas in England, to have their fight be broadcasted on the zone. That would be a good look for Jaime Munguia. And as far as Saul Alvarez goes, the only fight he has left, because he's already defeated Jaime Munguia, and this is how I would have predicted this fight to go. I was picking Canelo Alvarez to defeat Jaime Munguia via unanimous decision, which he did. And now the only fight left I say is David Benavidez. And I know some fans out there would like to see Saul Alvarez get in there with Jermall Charlo, but after the long layoff that Jermall Charlo had, I think Jermall Charlo needs to have more fights under his belt, and I don't think there's enough time for Jermall Charlo to get in there with Canelo Alvarez. And to be honest, to be frank, Jermall Charlo has not enough experience competing at super middleweight. He's only fought at middleweight in his most recent fight. In his comeback fight, he fought at super middleweight, but he gotta wear that ring rust off, and he needs to get in there with more better quality opponents at super middleweight for him to be considered a legitimate super middleweight that can challenge for the undisputed super middleweight title. As I said, there isn't a necessity for Canelo to fight Jermall Charlo. The only fight left for Canelo Alvarez is that fight versus David Benavidez, and hopefully we get that fight this year. And that's my post-fight thoughts for the Alvarez Munguia fight. And last but not least, I'm going to be giving y'all my thoughts on the news that we've heard about Ryan Garcia testing positive for a banned substance. Now, the drug is called Oleksandr. Now, I don't know if I'm pronouncing that name correctly, but I'm not a doctor. I'm not a physician. I'm not a pharmacist. So I'm not going to be able to pronounce these medicines and these banned substances correctly. I know that Ryan Garcia had tested positive for this illegal substance, and the New York Athletic Commission Board has not ruled that victory that Ryan Garcia got over on Devin Haney a no contest. And it's not a drug, from what I've heard, where it affects a fighter's performance, like steroids and drugs like that. But this is a drug that helps athletes or any other person help gain weight, or not gain weight, but to maintain a certain specific weight that they want to be at. And we do know Ryan Garcia's had trouble in the past making weight when he was competing at lightweight, hence why he moved up to super lightweight. And if he wasn't able to make weight during the official weigh-ins, and he paid Devin Haney and the commission board a fine of I don't know how many millions of dollars, but if he wasn't able to make weight for that fight versus Devin Haney, which if he did make weight at the official weigh-ins, he would have walked away being the new WBC super lightweight champion. But because he didn't make weight, he wasn't crowned champion that night after he was victorious versus Devin Haney. And that drug isn't considered a performance enhancer. That's the argument that I've heard from the side of Ryan Garcia and his camp and his fans. And Ryan Garcia did come in very heavy for that fight versus Devin Haney during fight night, but on the flip side of things, Devin Haney came in heavier than Ryan Garcia did during fight night. And not making any excuses as to why Ryan Garcia tested positive for this specific drug. And it doesn't matter if Ryan Garcia wasn't able to make weight at 140 as he was contracted to. And Ryan Garcia, it was rumored because of his social media antics that he wasn't properly training for this fight, but he proved those critics wrong. And what was one of his best performances, I'd say that was Ryan Garcia's best performance in his pro boxing career when he defeated Devin Haney, and he was able to perform as a highlight reel making elite level fighter as super lightweight, and he did that versus a former undefeated defending champion in Devin Haney. And there's still critics that say such things as, oh, Ryan Garcia didn't train properly, he cheated, this and that. And that sounds like haters to me, because if that drug, which I've heard from multiple sources, that it helps people maintain a certain weight limit, and Ryan Garcia was trying to make weight for that fight versus Devin Haney at 140 at super lightweight, and if he wasn't able to make weight, that means he struggled making weight. He's too big for that weight class, and that goes to show that he was taking that fight and that agreed weight limit serious if he was taking nutrients, supplements for him to maintain that weight limit and be somewhere around 140 to 150 or below 140, that is, for him to be able to make weight for that fight versus Devin Haney. And that goes to show that he was taking that training camp serious and what they had agreed upon serious for him to take all these vitamins and nutrient appliances that he could have probably got prescribed from his physicians and his doctors and his pharmacists and his camps, for him to take these nutrients for him to try and make weight. It wasn't like he was drinking and smoking every day and not taking this fight serious because his performance said otherwise. And it wasn't a drug like a steroids where he hits harder and performs better because of that drug. And this is why the hypocrisy of the critics of Ryan Garcia isn't making sense and seems like a desperate reach to try and hurt the reputation of Ryan Garcia more than anything. Because people were saying Ryan Garcia came in too heavy for that fight. That's why he was able to drop Devin Haney the way he did. And now that Ryan Garcia tested positive for a banned substance, and that banned substance turned out to be a substance that helps manage weight, and if that substance helps manage weight, that means that Ryan Garcia was trying to come in lighter for that fight instead of heavier. People were saying Ryan Garcia came in heavy, he's not taking this fight serious, he wasn't trying to make weight. And then after his performance, people were saying that he came in too heavy for the fight on purpose to win that fight, that's cheating. And now that he's testing positive for a drug that helps him manage weight, to come in lighter in hopes and in effort to come in lighter for that fight, now they're still trying to figure out a way to say that he cheated. Doesn't make sense to me. Seems like a desperate reach to try and hurt the reputation of Ryan Garcia, and seems more like hate than criticism to me. And depending on how this goes, I'm quite sure that the commissions will not rule this a no contest, and it'll still be a victory for Ryan Garcia. And I don't know how long. I don't even know if Ryan Garcia is suspended. Now, I don't know what the rules of the verdict is going to be for Ryan Garcia testing positive for this substance. I don't know if he's suspended. I don't know if he's going to be out of action for some time because they haven't ruled out a official verdict for this situation here. And if Ryan Garcia takes time off for who knows how long, and that's if the commission decides to suspend Ryan Garcia, we probably wouldn't have saw Ryan Garcia fight until late summer or autumn of later this year. So it's not hurting Ryan Garcia and what he has lined up for the future. And whenever Ryan Garcia does come back, he's still going to be amongst the top of the super lightweights. And he still has the A side to his advantage. And because Ryan Garcia is such a marketable, lucrative fighter with a name that Ryan Garcia carries, he's gonna be the A side and he's gonna have the luxury of picking and choosing who his opponent's gonna be, and whoever him and his team decides to make his opponent next to face him is still gonna be a huge fight, is still gonna be able to draw. And Ryan Garcia, his reputation shouldn't be hurt by this news that broke out about him recently. And Ryan Garcia now, if he does decide to have a rematch versus Devin Haney, I had mentioned before when I gave y'all my post-fight thoughts of the Jack Catterall versus Josh Taylor fight that Haney is rumored to fight Sandor Martin for the WBC super lightweight title. And if that is the next fight for Devin Haney, Ryan Garcia can face the winner of that fight. And I'm quite sure that Devin Haney and his camp is going to be looking forward to fighting Ryan Garcia more than them defending the WBC super lightweight title that Devin Haney still holds to this day versus Sandor Martin, who is a good fighter, but marketably speaking, it's more beneficial for Devin Haney and his camp to go for another fight versus Ryan Garcia than a fight versus Sandor Martin, who is based out of Spain and isn't that reputable as a Ryan Garcia is. And Devin Haney doesn't have a history versus Sandor Martin like he does versus Ryan Garcia. And that's why whenever Ryan Garcia decides to get back in the ring, I'm quite sure Devin Haney is eager to defend his title versus Ryan Garcia again than to fight anybody else. And if Ryan Garcia doesn't have a immediate rematch versus Devin Haney for his next fight, there's still a whole list of names that Ryan Garcia can face for his next fight. Barboza, even though people had thought that Barboza should have lost his last fight, he is promoted by Golden Boy, and if Barboza fights Ryan Garcia next, that would be an intriguing bout. And who came up short versus Barboza? Sean McCombs would be a good challenge as well, despite the fact that he's not that well known. And with Ryan Garcia having fought lesser known opponents before, him fighting a McCombs or Barboza wouldn't hurt his reputation at all. But with the current streak that Garcia is on, he'd like to fight more lucrative names for his next fight. There's Isaac Cruz, who fights on the zone as well. There is Sabril Matias, he's with PBC, but Ryan Garcia, he's did crossover promotional fights before. I know Sabril Matias isn't as marketable as a fighter like Gervonta Davis is, but Sabril Matias, unlike Gervonta Davis, holds a title, and in this sport, winning a title is the purpose of boxing. Hence why Garcia, if he's gonna look to capture a title, which he should have had if he was able to make weight versus Devin Haney, he should be the current WBC super lightweight champion. But because of what happened during their fight, during the course of that fight with Haney, Garcia wasn't able to become WBC super lightweight champion, and Surreal Matias, Isaac Cruz, those guys are lesser known than Devin Haney is, but a title is a title nonetheless, and those guys are just as dangerous as a Devin Haney. And stylistically speaking, if Ryan Garcia were to face those guys, that would be a slugfest, a firework of a fight. And it's more dangerous because those guys are lesser known than a Devin Haney. And stylistically, because of their aggressive style, these guys possess more of a threat to Ryan Garcia's reputation than a Devin Haney does. And then there's Teofimo Lopez as well. Now, we saw Ryan Garcia fight PBC fighters before, but never a top-ranked fighter before. And Top Rank has a good roster of super lightweights. There's Jose Ramirez, there's Isaac Dogbo, Jaime Ortiz, Josh Taylor, and Teofimo Lopez, and names like that Ryan Garcia can fight. And we can see Ryan Garcia fare well versus these fighters as well. And we've seen Teofimo Lopez go back and forth with Ryan Garcia before, and that fight would be a good fight and a good look for both fighters as well. Ryan Garcia is more reputable than Teofimo Lopez is, but Teofimo Lopez does hold the titles, and it could be beneficial for both parties, because if Teofimo Lopez were to get in there with Ryan Garcia, Teofimo Lopez can get more fans and more notice for fighting a glamorous name like Ryan Garcia. And Jack Catterall as well, can't forget about Catterall with the wins that he's been collecting as of late, and him getting that victory over on Josh Taylor, and him being, I believe, the #1 ranked contender according to the WBA. And I don't know if the WBC has him highly ranked, but if Ryan Garcia were to fight Jack Catterall, because Jack Catterall is promoted by Matchroom, and the Matchroom has their fights aired on the Zone, just like Golden Boy does. And Golden Boy and Matchroom has been working together for a while now. That fight can be an easy fight to make happen, and that would be a tough fight for both fighters, who is regarded as amongst the elites in the super lightweight. And that does it for this episode of Talk Boxing. Y'all let me know what y'all opinions are on all the topics that I covered on this episode. Subscribe, share, like this content if y'all want. Click the links in the description to show y'all support for this channel. All things and anything will be appreciated. And be good. And peace.